Hi everyone, my name's Gina Castelheim and I'm from It's Freezing in LA. Today I'm going to be speaking to Zakia Sewell, who's an NTS radio host, audio producer and DJ. And we're going to be talking about British folk culture and the land. Welcome, Zakia.
Hello, how's it going?
All good, all good. How are you? Have you been outside today at all?
I have. I managed to drag myself out for a run, which was good. And I know it's a bit naughty, but I went out twice, and I went and got some fruit and veg from my local shop. So I've been out twice today.
Flawless. Scandalous. No, you've got to get out. You've got to get out.
Yeah.
So you've got a new series, Zakia, that just aired on BBC Radio 4 called My Albion. Could you just start by telling us a little bit about the series, and for those who might not necessarily know, what is Albion and why did you go in search of it?
Yes, well, so I've been kind of presenting radio documentaries for a while, and this little idea has sort of been with me for quite a while, but it didn't quite have, there wasn't an opportunity to kind of explore it until very recently. And that, I guess, glimmer of an idea was something about the tension that I felt, being quite drawn to English folk music and British folk culture and customs and some of these kind of, like stone circles and like old pagan relics and all this kind of mysterious, mythical history of Britain. And so I've always been quite drawn to that, but then I've also felt kind of a bit of a tension and a bit of a question about whether, as a mixed race person, as someone with roots in the Caribbean, like that could belong to me, and also whether I should, like, why I was drawn to it, because I feel like a lot of, there is a kind of a bit of a bubbling up and a resurgence of interest in kind of British folk culture, but they don't tend to be people who look like me. So that kind of idea has been with me for a while, and then there was an opportunity to make a series, and it felt like a good time to do it. It was also kind of around the time of Black Lives Matter, actually, and I was thinking a lot about my position as a mixed race person and having a platform with Radio 4 and the sort of stories that I ought to be telling. And I kind of felt like it was a good opportunity to sort of make a program that would challenge that audience, the Radio 4 audience, which is a largely kind of white middle class, middle age audience, challenge them to think about their identity and what constitutes their identity, what constitutes Britishness, what constitutes whiteness as well. So that was the landscape, and then we sort of came up with this idea of Albion. I mean, Albion is the kind of traditional, or like the oldest name for Britain, and there's a whole kind of mythology around it, including kind of big giants and all sorts of kind of strange creatures and stuff like that. But ultimately it's a word that evokes a very ancient version of Britain, and it's quite interesting because I'm drawn to that vision of Albion, but also it's kind of been caught up quite a lot in sort of right-wing kind of visions of the British past, in which, before immigration, when it was this sort of like pure white Anglo-Saxon race. So Albion as a word is quite loaded, and I guess in the series it was a kind of an attempt to reclaim it, to think about this kind of ancient land, what that land might speak to us, this idea of a kind of a deep past that might offer a sense of belonging to those of us who are a bit more kind of, who find Britain's more recent history a bit more complicated, but also a vision for like a kind of a different kind of future. So Albion becomes sort of something in the deep past, but also this idea of something that we could move towards as well.
Beautiful. That's so beautiful. You just answered basically all my questions in one there. So yeah, like you said, in the series you explore these ancient monuments and these pagan figurative carvings and ritual ceremonies that would have taken place in the past. Where was your favorite place or landscape that you visited, and why?
Unfortunately, because we were making it in lockdown, so it was actually a bit limited. So I think when we were coming up with the series, we had sort of like a map, and I've got all these kind of, I'm trying to think of any of them here. I've got all these funny old books that are kind of like mystical Britain, and like, actually, there you go. Look, here's one.
Yeah, grab one.
I didn't actually just put this here, it was just on my bed to read. Celtic Mysteries. Celtic Mystery. So I've got quite a few of these like strange books that have like loads of, I mean, lots of kind of cool sculptures and stuff from around the world, but also some of them have, here you go, like they've got dolmens and things like that, and they've got, some of them like have them on a map and you can go and visit them and stuff like that. So, and originally that was kind of the idea. Oh look, there's the Sheila and the Gig who turns up in the series.
Very explicit. On the side of the church, was it?
Yeah, on the side of Kilpeck Church. Oh, that's actually the one that we saw in the series.
Yeah.
So initially we sort of like had this idea of going on this big like quest, actually moving around the country and going to see a lot more of the monuments themselves and these sacred spaces themselves, but unfortunately that wasn't possible. Yeah, I'm not sure there's like there was not particularly a place that we visited that kind of spoke to that idea of ancient Britain. But as you explore in the series, I guess for me, Wales, where my grandparents lived, and where I spent a large part of my childhood, has always given me that kind of that feeling. That's when I kind of get that deep sense of belonging to the land, and also connecting to something that feels quite ancient, especially because Wales, like, it's all steeped in the kind of Arthurian legend, and everywhere's like Merlin's this and whatnot, you know, it's castles, it's dragons, it's like that magical element of the landscape is very present there.
So the series is all about exploring Britain's pagan roots. Why does that matter to you, or why does it matter why does remembering a sort of forgotten original story of Britain, why does that matter? Remembering sort of a prehistory Britain.
Well, I think the reason that it's always appealed to me is that, you know, as a mixed race person, as someone with roots in the Caribbean as well as England, and all the kind of stories and, you know, history that comes with that heritage, you know, like my grandparents lived my mum's parents lived you know, on a site that was a former plantation, on the land that had been bought off the previous, you know, like the family whose like great grandparents, whatever, had owned a slavery plantation. That those stories, that legacy is still very present there. You go to, like, my grandma's family were, like, you know, telling me about graveyards where you can go, it's like the slave graveyard, and just still in the islands. So they live with that reality, not just on that kind of historical sense, but also in the economic sense of, you know, the lack of opportunity and like coming over here to kind of find a better life, but it was a life that was kind of, in a way, denied them because of that history and the kind of economic consequences of that historical exploitation. So that's, you know, that's one part of me, and that's one part of my family story. And then here I am in Britain trying to navigate my identity as a British person. And so for that reason, I guess, to be proud to be British for me is quite, and for a lot of other people, is quite difficult, because it's like, how can I be proud when and it's not like, you know, all nations make mistakes, but I think one of the things here is that history and you know, what Britain sort of got from that history, from that historical exploitation, not just in the Caribbean but across the world, it's still not really being admitted to. It's still not really out in the open. It still hasn't really been like head on, like dealt with, like, yes, this is where the great in Britain comes from. It comes from historical exploitation. I guess at the start of the series, what was coming up was this pagan past or this kind of, pagan past, we don't know, like it's kind of imagined. Ultimately we don't know what it was like back then, but the deep past is like these other historical kind of symbols and stories, things like Morris dancing, the old English folk songs that seem to kind of drift through the ages from centuries and centuries and centuries ago. They kind of speak to a version of Britishness that's not caught up with all that colonial stuff. And so there's an appeal in that. And also, I think another thing that really appeals to me about that kind of deeper history or those folk traditions is that like they're common. So I could go to they're common across the world. So I'll go to, the island that my mum's parents are from, Carriacou, where I mentioned, in the Caribbean, and they'll have a kind of dance for the harvest, or they'll have some kind of ritual that they do that's kind of like been secretly kept on for years and years. It reminds you of something that you've heard in Britain or in Sudan or any, like I think you hear the commonalities and the kind of shared human experience, or you find the shared human experience, I think, sometimes with these folk traditions. So I guess that's another reason that they appeal, because they speak of the things that we share as humans, as opposed to these kind of national stories that divide us.
So in the series, you mentioned Albion being a vision of what this country could maybe one day become. How can people use these folk stories to give them a sense of belonging? Or how are you using, or how will you be using these folk stories to write the next chapter of your belonging in Britain and your British identity?
Yes, well, I feel like one of the main themes in the series was thinking about the land itself. And I guess another reason that these traditions and stories and songs appeal to me is because they seem like they're connected to the land, they're connected to the landscape. This was something that we were kind of exploring in the series, and I feel like it's this idea of a connection to the land, which you might call Albion, or offers a gateway, offers a way to sort of to feel grounded and to feel a sense of identity that's not sort of tied up in a kind of made up idea of Britishness. It's just it's there's something grounding in it. And I guess it also connects to that wider story I was talking about like being a human walking the planet and experiencing a sunrise, or I don't know, these things seem to offer ways of feeling a sense of belonging that aren't sort of tied up in the stories that separate and divide us. But also, I mean, Albion just becomes a sort of metaphor, I guess, for like a version of Britain in which, as a nation, we've kind of faced up to our, like, the dark past, the dark aspects of our history. And we're kind of pulling on these kind of ancient traditions, our kind of spiritual connection to the landscape and everything that we might have lost, at the same time like dealing with what is. And that would sort of give us a more integrated sense of self as a country. A vision of Albion that kind of draws on the traditions of the past, like learns from the landscape itself, and also like is brave enough to sort of face up to the complexity of its history. That's a country that I feel I could feel proud to belong to. Whether we're going to get there anytime soon, I'm not sure. Here's hoping. Yeah,
that's beautiful. And after listening to your series, I learned how much folk tradition imbued people with this love of the land, and how they really listened to the land and listened to what it was telling them. How can we use folk tradition to respond to the ecological crisis, climate catastrophe, ecocide, all the bad stuff happening today?
I mean, the tradition is one aspect of it, and I think the stories that we tell, the songs that we write, the folk arts and crafts that we make, they're kind of like they're like manifestations of personal connections and personal stories and experiences that people have had, haven't they? So I feel like the first point, before we get to the tradition, I feel like the first point is like people recognizing that there's something that's been lost, which is that connection to the land. And I feel for a lot of people, especially like a lot of people that I know in London and whatever, they don't even realize that they're missing out on something by not having that connection with nature. I was really lucky to sort of have that bond sort of made as a child, and it's something that I've returned to. But I think it's really difficult for people who haven't necessarily grown up in like a rural landscape, or you know, to forge that connection. I feel like when you're spending time in nature, it kind of speaks to you, and then you care more, you're more invested, and you know, in your local area or whatever, suddenly if someone's saying they want to build on this green space, or people are littering or whatever, you've got like a more of an emotional connection, you're more invested. I feel like the kind of traditions and the ritual, that's really about kind of building a community then around that landscape and coming together and having, you know, if you've got a tradition that's about around the moon, or the phases of the moon, or the harvest, suddenly you're noticing the seasons, you know, you're noticing things that perhaps would otherwise pass you by, because you have this sort of community activity kind of based around it. So I feel like it takes individuals first, like making the connection, well, whichever comes first, chicken or egg, whatever, but you know, community activities that kind of help us to actually become more aware of the flow of the seasons, of, you know, whatnot. I feel like it would be really, really useful. And you know, for me, just something as simple as like being more aware of like the moon cycles, like that has enriched my, even living in the city, even like looking at the moon from my bedroom window on the 3rd floor, like I suddenly become much more aware of the fact that I'm on this planet, like in the cosmos, you know, spinning around. And so I feel like, you know, folk traditions and customs have are very powerful in that sense. Yeah, I mean, I feel like folk customs of the 21st century are going to look, we're probably doing them now, we don't even realize it, because we think of folk as something that's like in the past. But yeah, who knows what the
free men walking down cobbled streets with pitchforks.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Zakia. And just for everyone listening, have you got anything coming up soon, or anything that you're working on at the minute?
Yeah, I'm kind of cooking up a new idea for a series at the moment, which hasn't been pitched or taken on yet, but it's kind of like thinking it's like expanding, I guess, some of the ideas around myth and this idea of kind of visions for the future, and how we can sort of co-create those, I guess. So I'm kind of cooking up that at the moment, but yeah, also just trying to keep each day as it comes in this uncertain time in which we find ourselves in. Yeah.
Aren't we all? But that sounds very, very cool. We'll keep an eye out for that. And where can people catch you online or follow you on social if they want to hear more?
Yes, you can follow me. What's my Instagram? Instagram is Zakia, ZZZAKIA, Zakia with 3 Zs. And on Twitter, I'm Zakia Sewell. And you can also like look me up. I have a website. That's just so old-fashioned these days. zakiasewell.co.uk. And I'm also on NTS radio. I have a radio show that's like more music and stuff every Saturday morning on NTS. So you can join me there if you fancy it. Amazing.
And for anyone that's not listened to it already, go check out My Albion. It's on the BBC Radio 4 website, I believe. It's going to be up there for a while.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely go listen to that. I've listened to the 4-part series twice now. Loved it even more the second time. Just gems of truth. So yeah, you won't regret. Go listen to that, guys. And yeah, thanks so much for chatting to us, Zakia. And thanks for all your work with questing, searching, exploring new visions and ways for us to be in harmony with our surroundings.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.